Всем привет! Our topic today are the verbs with the suffix ova and jeva. And these are the verbs that are actually a variation of the first conjugation. So before you proceed to the verbs ova, jeva, make sure to watch my tutorials on the first and maybe even second conjugation, but for this one, definitely the first. So what happens in the first conjugation, you take the verb that most verbs in the first conjugation end in at or yat. And what you do to conjugate it or change the form of the verb according to the subject of a sentence, you drop the soft sign and you replace it with a set of endings. So you add you for a subject that is ya, and for ты you add ешь, он, она, оно, ет, мы ем, вы ете, они ют. So that's our baseline before we go into ova, jeva verbs. So what happens with the verbs that end in ova and then ten soft sign, or jeva in ten soft sign, is that we, first of all, we follow the same steps. We take off the ten soft sign ending and we add you, yes, yet, yem, yeti, yut, just like with the regular first conjugation verbs. The trick is that suffix ova is gonna change once you basically change the default infinitive form of the verb into conjugated forms. So for all of these forms, ova will change to u. So basically, if you have the ova, jeva verbs, then you drop all 5 letters, ova and ten soft sign, and you add u in front of every personal ending. So it will be u, you, u, yes, u, yet, and so on. So let's take a look at the examples. So let's take a look first at the totally regular verbs not. So once again, first thing you do is, like, in your mind, you separate the ten soft sign, and then you basically will be using the everything up to ten soft sign for every conjugated form. And then you change the ten soft sign into the ending. So to say I know, you would say я знаю. You know, ты знаешь. He knows, she knows, it knows. Он, она, оно знает. We know, мы знаем. Вы, you guys, знаете. And they know is они знают. So once again, that's the totally regular one. Now with ова, jeva, let's take a look at the verb советовать, which means to give advice to somebody. So here again, the first step is to separate it into parts. And if in a totally regular verb, we just separated the ending, here we kind of like mentally have to separate the ending and that ova, jeva suffix. So then when we have to conjugate for every personal pronoun, once again, we take the first part, in this case, the part up to ova or jeva, and we're going to use it for all of the forms. Then we have to remember that ova is going to change into u. So that's what we will have here. And after that step, we're going to add the endings. So for example, if you want to say, I am giving advice to somebody, I am giving advice will be я советую. And you are giving advice or you suggest something, that's ты советуешь. Он, она, оно советует. Мы советуем. Вы советуете. And они советуют. Now, that was an example of the ova verb. And now let's take a look at the jeva verb. The idea is going to be exactly the same, and the steps that we're doing are exactly the same. So we kind of think about it as everything up to jeva, then jeva, and then ten soft sign. And we will use everything up to it in every conjugated form. Then we'll change jeva into u. And then we're going to add the ending. So for instance, to say I am dancing or I dance, you will say я танцую. You are dancing or you dance. Ты танцуешь. Он, она, оно танцует. Мы танцуем. Вы танцуете. Они танцуют. So that's how we conjugate the ova, jeva verbs. Now let's take a look at the verbs themselves. So here you have kind of like a bunch of verbs in this category. And once again, if you have ova and a smaller category are the Yeva verbs, but again, whatever happens, you follow the steps that I just explained. The tense soft sign will change exactly like it changed before with the regular conjugation, but then ova and Yeva are gonna disappear and are gonna be replaced by u for all of these forms. And this is the conjugation for the present tense. So for the present tense, whenever we say something like I am doing it or I do that, you have to think about these steps. Now, past tense is actually going to be completely regular. So just like we take any other verb like знать or работать to build the past tense, you should remember it by now, you drop tense soft sign, you keep everything up to tense soft sign, and it means ova and Yeva too. So past tense, we do not change anything here. We just follow a totally regular rule. Drop tense soft sign, keep everything up to it, and then replace the tense soft sign with l, la, lo, li, depending on the subject of a sentence. So if the subject is male, it can be expressed by я, if a guy says I, ты, if you're talking to somebody and that's a guy, or он, he. So я, ты, and он will get the ending л, рисовал. Like if a guy says I was drawing something, я рисовал. Or if we're saying he, John, Mark, Max was drawing something, он рисовал. Then we use the ending ла for feminine forms, lo for neutral forms, and li for plural forms. So once again, the good thing about the past tense of Yeva verb is that it's completely regular, and that's what we love, 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 right? Because finally something is easy. Okay, let's take a look at more of these verbs in more detail and we'll practice. Now, you notice that on my worksheet here, I use two different types of font for the verbs. And actually, for every English verb, I am using two versions of the Russian verbs. For example, to say to have a conversation, I have беседовать and побеседовать. So here I'm just going to talk a little bit about the aspect because the verbs that are not in bold are the imperfective verbs, and the verbs that are in bold are the perfective verbs. There will be a separate video that goes into more detail about this distinction, but for now you just have to remember that every English verb has at least two Russian verbs. Now, in the two Russian verbs, one represents the imperfective aspect of the verb, and these are this aspect we use when we talk about general facts. For example, I like having conversations. Just in general, I like talking to people, and that would be я люблю беседовать. Or when it's an action in process, for instance, you can say, hey, hold on a second, we are having a conversation. Like, извини, подожди, мы сейчас беседуем. We are having a conversation right now. Or maybe repeated action. For instance, you can say, me and this person often have very interesting conversations. Мы с этим человеком часто беседуем. Then perfective verbs are used for completed actions. And completed actions, just because they're completed, they can be only used as the past context. I did that, this action is completed, or a future context, as in I will have it done, I will have it completed. But they cannot be in the present tense because the present tense means an action in process, and that's going to be the imperfective verb. So all of the perfective verbs still follow the conjugation type that I have just explained, but we translate them into English, as will do it. For example, I can say, hey, we'll have a conversation about that tomorrow, meaning we'll complete that action tomorrow. So I will say, мы побеседуем об этом завтра. Okay, so again, that will work more through the aspect of the verbs. It's one of the most exciting and challenging topics of the Russian grammar, and I know many people are thinking that cases are difficult. Cases are not difficult. There's a lot to remember for the cases, but what's really difficult is the aspect. But the aspect is easy at the beginning levels, because this is basically what you're going by, like the kind of like rule of thumbs that you see on this slide. But once you go into more kind of like advanced speaking, then there's a lot of nuances that come from the context that will decide whether you should be using the, perfective or imperfective aspect of the verb. But for now, it's easy. General fact, action and process, repeated action, imperfective. If your emphasis on the completion of action in the past or in the future, then it's going to be a perfective verb. Okay, let's practice. So here you see some verbs that I selected from that list, and you see it in English, and we'll go over them one after another about what they mean in Russian, and then we're going to practice conjugating them. So to travel in Russian is путешествовать. 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 And that means to travel for pleasure, like as a tourist, where you go something to have fun while traveling. I know sometimes Americans say like, I travel to New York for work. This is not путешествовать. It's because you're not really take a trip for pleasure. You're just going there, for work or for whatever else. So путешествовать is really when you're like planning a trip and you're going from one place to another, exploring the country or exploring some area or a region. That would be путешествовать. Okay, the next verb is to try. In Russian is пробовать. Пробовать. And to try, it means both as to kind of like make an attempt in something, and to try as like to taste something like food or drink. The next one is to kiss, and in Russian it's целовать. Целовать. And that's to kiss someone. We also have a different verb that's very similar to this one, which means to kiss one another, like to be kissing. Here it's specifically to kiss, like to give a kiss to. Then to draw is рисовать. Рисовать. Then to interest is интересовать. Like this subject is of interest to me. This subject interests me. That's the verb интересовать. Интересовать. Then to take pictures, as in with a camera, or with your phone, I guess nowadays, doesn't matter. When you take a picture, that's фотографировать, like to photograph. Фотографировать. And you notice there are 3 letters O in this word, but all of them are unstressed, so you only pronounce sounds all the way. Фотографировать. 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 It's because, remember, the unstressed O is pronounced as A. Then to give advice, you already know this verb, that's советовать. 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 And совет, everything up to over, actually means the advice as the noun. Then to train is тренировать. Like when, somebody is training somebody in something. Тренировать. So to train somebody, to train a person is тренировать. Then to invest is инвестировать. 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 To plan something, планировать. 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 To stay overnight means ночевать. Ночевать. And again, unstressed O is pronounced as A. Ночевать. So the word night, like the nighttime, is ночь with the O because it's the only vowel, and we pronounce it by like as a full O, a stressed O. But ночевать we pronounce with A. Ночевать. And to dance is танцевать. You already know this verb, танцевать. Okay, let's practice. And by the way, can you see, let's practice in Russian means давайте потренируемся. And again, you see this kind of like U, because тренировать, that's the verb that you can see here, is the over verb that changes. Okay, here's how we're going to be conjugating the verbs. We are gonna go from я, ты, to, они, and then again for every verb. So for example, you'll say, I am traveling, you are trying, he is kissing, and so on. Okay, so to say I am traveling, you would conjugate путешествовать by dropping ten soft sign and replacing it with you and changing over to u. So it will be я путешествую. Я путешествую. To say you're trying or you're tasting, we would say ты пробуешь. Пробуешь. And you can hear that I'm leaving you a couple of seconds to figure it out. So please do. If we're saying he is kissing, for instance, he is kissing her, we would say он целует. Он целует. To say we are drawing, as in like we're drawing a cool picture, that would be мы рисуем. Мы рисуем. Something interests somebody. So we can say, you guys interest the FBI. I don't know. So, вы интересуете. Вы интересуете. I didn't give you much time to think. I got excited about my FBI example. So, вы интересуете. They are taking pictures. Like, hey, they're over there taking pictures. Taking pictures. That will be они фотографируют. Они фотографируют. Then we will say, I am giving advice. Я советую. Or we actually use it like, I recommend that. We use the same verb as like, I'm giving advice. So я советую. Or even better, I don't recommend it. Не советую. Не советую. I suggest you don't do it. Or don't try it or whatever. Тренировать, we can say, you are training somebody tomorrow, let's say. You would say, ты тренируешь. Тренируешь. If we're saying that, let's say, he or she is investing in something, that will be он or она or оно инвестирует. Инвестирует. We are planning. Мы планируем. You guys are staying overnight. Вы ночуете. For instance, if you want to say, hey, where are you guys spending the night? Where are you staying overnight? Где вы ночуете? Где вы ночуете? And they are dancing, or they dance, that would be они танцуют. Они танцуют. You probably noticed that all of these verbs were the imperfective verbs. Or maybe you didn't notice, so I'm telling you, these are all imperfective verbs. That's why when I was translating them into English, I was saying, I am traveling, you are trying, he is kissing, by using the present continuous, the ing form, that kind of gives you this process. Okay, then now let's take a look at almost the same set of verbs as perfective verbs. And the first one, the travel, does have a perfective version, but it's almost always is used as imperfective. For instance, я люблю путешествовать. I love traveling. Because путешествовать, to travel for pleasure, usually kind of means like an extended period of time rather than the completed action. So I can like decided not to give you the perfective one, not to confuse you. But all other verbs can be used quite often as completed actions. So let's take a look. To try, as like to make complete an attempt, would be попробовать, or to taste something. Попробовать, попробовать. To kiss, again, as a completed action, would be поцеловать, поцеловать, поцеловать. To draw as a completed action will be нарисовать, нарисовать, нарисовать. To interest, заинтересовать, заинтересовать. To take pictures, сфотографировать, сфотографировать, сфотографировать. To give advice, посоветовать, посоветовать. To train, потренировать, потренировать. To invest, инвестировать, инвестировать. And if you remember the previous slide, you will notice that to invest, инвестировать, is actually the same verb for imperfective and perfective forms, which also happens. Then to plan, спланировать, спланировать. To stay overnight, заночевать. Заночевать. And to dance, потанцевать. Потанцевать. Now you notice that perfective verbs usually have something like in front of them. Like пробовать was imperfective. Попробовать is perfective. Целовать, поцеловать. Рисовать, нарисовать. Интересовать, заинтересовать. Фотографировать, сфотографировать. And that's pretty much how it always happens. Almost always happens, because sometimes you will have a perfective verb that doesn't have a prefix and an imperfective one that does. So really the rule of thumb is really to learn both types of the verbs for every English verbs, and usually you start with the imperfective and then perfective, like пробовать, попробовать, целовать, поцеловать. Okay, let's practice these forms, and again we're going to go from я to они, and then я from вы. So one after another. So to say, so once again, the form will be the present tense form, but the context can only be the future. We're not practicing the past tense because it's very easy. Past, you dropped in soft sign, add lo, la, lo, li. So we're practicing the present tense forms, but here it will be for the future. So to say, I will try, we will say, я попробую. So я пробую is I'm trying. Я попробую is I will try. Поцеловать, you will kiss. You will kiss her. Ты поцелуешь. Ты поцелуешь. We can say she will draw a cat in 10 minutes. Like, that will be again a completed action. So she will draw will be она нарисует. Она нарисует. So to interest, yeah, for instance, you can say, we will basically be of interest to somebody. So it will be мы заинтересуем. Мы заинтересуем. For instance, we will interest you in our business. Мы заинтересуем вас в нашем бизнесе. Then you guys, or you formal, will take pictures. Вы сфотографируете. Вы сфотографируете. They will give you advice. Они посоветуют. Они посоветуют. To train, I will train somebody. Я потренирую. Я потренирую. Or something, you can actually use it like я потренирую русскую грамматику. I will basically train in, practice Russian grammar. So train or to practice, that is тренировать. To invest, and you say you will invest in something. Ты инвестируешь. Ты инвестируешь. To plan, like he or she will have it planned. They will make a plan. So completed action in the future would be он or она or оно спланирует. Спланирует. We will stay somewhere overnight. Мы заночуем. I think we'll stay overnight in the hotel. Мы заночуем в отеле. You guys will dance. For a little bit. Maybe you will dance for a couple hours and done. Вы потанцуете. Or maybe you will dance with each other. Вы потанцуете. Вы потанцуете. Okay, so that was a little bit of practice. I know it was a lot, but rewatch it to kind of like get used to this. Ooh. Now, before I finish this tutorial, I want to say there's still a couple more things to consider about these verbs. Some verbs have the letters ye, v, a actually in their stem. So they look like the suffix yeva verbs, and these are the verbs that we looked at in this category, but they don't follow this change to u rule, because that yeva just only looks like the suffix yeva, and in reality, it's just part of the stem and it doesn't change. And the verbs that have yeva can be completely regular or show other types of variation. For example, completely regular verbs where yev is really part of the stem is a verb like одевать, like to dress somebody. For instance, я одеваю ребенка. I'm dressing my kid. Or надевать, to put something on. Я надеваю блузку. I'm putting a blouse on. Or, зевать. So they are completely regular. So, for example, if I want to say I'm dressing my kid, я одеваю ребенка. Or I can say, hey, what are you putting on? Что ты надеваешь? Or I can like, hey, look, my cat is yawning. Она зевает. So here we just follow totally regular conjugation type. Then there are some regular verbs with a variation. So, for example, the verb воевать, which means to be at war with somebody. So here, Ева changes to you. Or I usually tell my students the whole stem changes to you, and then we add the regular endings. So, for example, if I want to say I'm at war with somebody, would be я воюю, ты воюешь, он воюет, and so on. And finally, there can be a different type of regular variation. For example, here the examples are the verbs жевать and плевать. Жевать means to chew, and плевать means to spit. So as you can see in forms, in жевать we have this у. Я жую, ты жуешь. But then we also changed е to you, ё. Ты жуешь, он жует, мы жуем, and so on. Плевать looks similar to воевать, because this Ева is basically looking like you now. Я плюю, ты плюешь. But then again, we have also the variation in the ending, as in ё. Ты плюешь, он плюет, and so on. So this is something definitely not to worry about at the beginners levels, but I still want to tell you that these variations exist, because sometimes students like, okay, so одевать is a Ева verb. And I'm like, no, it's not, because this Yev is part of the stem rather than the suffix Eva. Okay, I hope that was useful, and feel free to ask any follow-up questions in the comments. Okay, stay tuned for more tutorials. Thank you for your attention.